Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the historic parlor of the Rosenbach. I'm Alex Ames. I will be your presenter and your harpist this evening. I see it is just now 5:59. We have some people in the audience, but many more registrants who I'm sure are just going to be signing in the next few minutes. So thank you for your patience, and we will get started very shortly. For those of you who are just signing in, I want to thank you so much for joining us for this evening's program. We're just going to wait a few more minutes to get started as more registrants arrive into the virtual webinar. So thanks again, and looking forward to continuing the conversation shortly. I think we'll go ahead and get started now, seeing as it's 6:05. I again want to thank all of you very much for joining us this evening for this special event at the Rosenbach. I'm excited about this program for so many reasons, two of the most prominent of which are the fact that we are, as you can see, actually broadcasting live this evening from the historic parlor at the Rosenbach on Delancey Place in Philadelphia. This is a first for us in this time of virtual programs, and I'm thrilled to be able to do that. I'm also excited because this is a musical performance, at least in part this evening, that will be accompanied by distribution to all of you in the audience following the program of digital copies of much of the sheet music that I am performing later on this evening. From the collection, digitized from the collection of the Free Library of Philadelphia Music Department. So there's a lot going on in this program this evening. Love's Old Sweet Song, the music of James Joyce. So thrilled to have you here, and we'll get started. My name is Alex Ames. I work in the collections department and the education department at the Rosenbach, meaning I spend a lot of my time both stewarding and taking care of our wonderful collections here at the Rosenbach, including our phenomenal and world-renowned James Joyce collection, and interpreting these materials to the public and sharing them with all of you through events like this. It's wonderful to have you. I am joined this evening by my colleague, Andrew White, who is going to be facilitating the tech, which is a big task with these sorts of events, and also helping out with some various parts of the program. So that's sort of the team that you have at your disposal for this event this evening. Before we dive into the specific content of this conversation tonight, which focuses on considering the place of music in James Joyce's life and in his literary works, just for some context, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Rosenbach and our Bloomsday activities. Given the focus of this event, I imagine that many of you are already well familiar with both the Rosenbach and our Bloomsday festivities, but I do want to say a few words just to provide context for anyone who may be new to us. The Rosenbach is an historic house museum and special collections library located near Rittenhouse Square here in Philadelphia. As I already mentioned, we have a renowned James Joyce collection, including the manuscript of Joyce's novel Ulysses. Every year we celebrate Bloomsday. This year, our Bloomsday celebration is not confined to one day in June, but rather is an entire month. And I'm thrilled to sort of bring up the rear of that celebration with this virtual event this evening. I want to thank our sponsors who make all of our Bloomsday celebrations possible. Bloomsday 2021 has been made possible through a generous grant from the Consulate General of Ireland's Immigrant Support Program. And I also want to extend a special thanks to Lenore H. Steiner and Perry A. Lerner for their support of our Bloomsday festivities. Their support and the support of all of our sponsors and members and community members really makes the work that we do here possible. Before I switch to my next slide, I just want to draw all of your eyes to the logo of the Consulate General of Ireland, which is a little bit of a prelude for conversations to come about the place of harp in Celtic culture. If you have not yet seen the Rosenbach's feature-length film, we have one. We have a feature-length film called I Said Yes, a celebration of Bloomsday at the Rosenbach. It is available at rosenbach.org/Bloomsday, and you can check it out online and learn more about the wonderful history of Bloomsday celebrations at the Rosenbach. I will confess to you, I've been so busy practicing for tonight, I haven't yet watched it, but I definitely look forward to seeing it myself and really learning more about the fabulous history of Bloomsday here at the Rosenbach. For those of you who are in the region, in the city and in the region, and are comfortable coming out to visit us in person, I really do invite you to come to the Rosenbach to see our newest gallery installation titled The Global Other, Race and Empire in James Joyce's Ulysses. which this program tonight was actually somewhat inspired by the research that we did for that little installation. It's a one gallery show. You can check it out, and my colleague Andrew White is also going to put in the chat box at some point this evening a link so that you can see the online version of that exhibition. You should also come on site to explore our beautiful garden, including plants connected to James Joyce's works. Learn more at rosenbach.org/visit. While you're online, why not pick up some great Rosenbach Bloomsday merchandise? Here's the URL for our online shop. If you're interested in buying some souvenirs of Bloomsday at the Rosenbach, I invite you to do so via that link. Andrew will also put that link in the chat box for you so that you can have easy access to it. You know, events like this take a lot of resources to put together, both staff resources and technological resources. And it's through support from friends like you that we are able to offer programs like this one at no charge. So I do hope that you will consider making a fully tax-deductible gift to the Rosenbach Fund at rosenbach.org/donate. It's the best way, one of the best ways for you to show your support of these kinds of cultural programs beyond attending. We're so grateful that you're attending. Also, another great way to show support is to make a donation. So it would mean a lot to me personally and to all of my colleagues if you would be so kind as to make a financial contribution during these challenging times for museums and cultural institutions. So thank you in advance for your support. So with that, we're going to dive into the content for the evening. I've already done my warm-ups. That's what I was doing while my microphone was muted and you all were patiently waiting. I was tuning up and warming up on harp. I want us to do a little intellectual warm-up together. As I mentioned at the top of the program, our focus tonight is really thinking about the cultural and social and psychological place of music in James Joyce's life and his literary production. And so before we dive into that topic, I just want us to think about this question in terms of really our own lives. So think about this question and please enter your thought in the chat box. Is there a song that occupies a special place in your memory, one that always brings up certain emotions? If so, what is that song and what's the memory? If you're comfortable sharing that response, please put some thoughts in the chat box, and Andrew will read a few comments aloud to us as they roll in. I will remind you that this should only be something you're comfortable sharing with the whole wide world, because this is going to be, once it's in the chat box, it'll be shared publicly, and we're posting this video online after the program. So if you have any thoughts that you are comfortable sharing with us all, please enter them. So I'll give you a couple moments to think about that, and Andrew will share some responses as they come rolling in.
The responses are rolling in as we speak. So Pamela points out that one song that stays with her appropriately is Linger by the Cranberries, an Irish band, with a song that fits our topic for sure. As time goes by, from the movie Casablanca, Ed says, which was his wedding song. Thomas says the song at the end of The Dead, which we'll be hearing that tonight, played beautifully on the harp, the Last of Ogram. Mac the Knife says Myra, she remembers her parents dancing to the piano as she played it. Sarah remembers Oh God, Our Help in Ages Past, the hymn. And Eleanor says that she sings Love's Old Sweet Song when she thinks about her husband and daughter. Carol says, as we think about Irish music, she remembers her mother singing Tuorlu Laura as a lullaby. My own mother sang that. So we've gotten some wonderful comments here, Alex.
Well, clearly, sometimes my discussion questions that I ask in these virtual programs don't necessarily get a whole lot of responses, and this one seems to be one that really resonates. For obvious reasons, most of us have strong associations with songs from our past, and I really thank all of you for sharing your thoughts about this. And please continue the discussion in the chat if you want to say more about songs that mean a lot to you. I think it's fair to say that music just has a way of speaking to us that is different an emotional, a psychological way of communication that is really meaningful and can stir up memories. And I'm glad that one of the attendees mentioned the Last of Ogram, which plays such an important role in Joyce's story, The Dead, which is actually the piece that in many ways inspired this program, because I was asked to learn it by a Rosenbach community member, and that set the wheels in motion for this conversation. So yeah, I mean, we will see as well that music played a central role in Joyce's life, and music is a great way to think about James Joyce's literary work. So thank you all very much for sharing your thoughts about that. So let me walk you through the agenda for our time together this evening. I'm going to start by giving you a sort of general introduction to James Joyce and Ulysses. I would imagine that for many, if not most of you in the audience, this is probably going to largely be review. But for anyone who is relatively new to Joyce studies, I really want to offer a sort of broader introduction to Joyce at a 101 level. And I'll tell you a bit more about our Global Other installation that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. Then we'll talk a little bit more about music in James Joyce's world, and what I will frame more in depth as post-colonial understandings of Joyce's works. A key feature of our Global Other installation is thinking about how Joyce represented the fact that during his lifetime, Ireland was a colonized nation within the British Empire. And we'll look at how music speaks to that issue. Then I will do a parlor recital. I have about between 15 and 20 minutes of music prepared to share with you. And then after the event, probably tomorrow morning or sometime early next week, I'm going to send around digitized sheet music from the FLP collection with you all. The program will probably be about an hour and 15 minutes in length, thereabouts. So thank you again for joining. And if at any point you need to depart, please know that we are recording this and we'll make the recording available online as well. So let's dive right in. Again, I want to start just by providing some contextual information for anyone in the group who is interested in sort of a broader foundation of who James Joyce was and what his work means in cultural history. So James Joyce was born in 1882 into an Irish Catholic family of rich in Roman Catholic piety, somewhat diminishing in terms of their financial situation. His family had been somewhat genteel in the recent past, but financial mismanagement meant that his family's fortunes were somewhat diminishing. Joyce's family had long been active in political circles, and his father, James Joyce's father, took an active interest in the liberal politics of the time that favored greater freedoms for the Irish. Joyce grew up in a Victorian world, a climate of British imperial stability that was marked by increasing nationalist conflict, increasing development of Irish cultural and political nationalism. Joyce's own family history was directly impacted by the British imperial politics of his day, and an emerging sense of Irish nationalism at home. It's also important to know that the Joyces were a very musical family. James Joyce's father, like many people in his social class and his generation, was a great lover of opera. And Joyce himself, both Joyce and his father were accomplished singers and musicians in their own right, as we will discuss more a little bit later. So James Joyce grew up in this intensely pious environment, attended good schools in Ireland. But as he matured as a student and as a young man, he grew frustrated both by the sort of constrictions of Roman Catholicism as he perceived them, and the fraught political environment of his time. He grew frustrated both by British imperialism and by Irish, what he perceived as a sort of, the equally difficult and problematic ethnic and cultural nationalism that was shaping up as a sort of competitor to British imperialist rule. After graduating from University College, Joyce ended up leaving Ireland and spent most of the rest of his life in various multicultural European cities pursuing his writing career. Ulysses, his great masterpiece, as many of you know, is a novel set on one day in Dublin. But in fact, Ulysses was conceptualized first in Trieste, which then was a city, an important port city in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and was written in Zurich and Paris. The book was published in Paris in 1922 in the first complete edition. So this characteristically Irish novel is actually not Irish per se in terms of where it was written. After its publication, the novel quickly gained accolades as a great work of modernist prose that really changed the nature of prose composition, and it earned instant infamy from censors and particularly, pious people, I guess, for explicit treatments of sexuality that some labeled at the time pornographic, but were really explicit treatments of subjects of a sexual nature that made Joyce a very controversial figure in literary and cultural circles. Ulysses, as I already mentioned, is Joyce's great masterpiece. It is inspired by Joyce's lifelong interest in the ancient epic, the Odyssey. It traces a day in the life of a main character named Leopold Bloom, as well as Bloom's friends and associates, and is largely autobiographical in nature. Sort of taking this, Joyce's life and his fictional narration around that life and hanging it over a framework from this classical mythology. The novel is considered the most effective application of a literary style known in French as monologue intérieur, better known in English as a stream of consciousness style that really broke down the traditional way of narrating fictional prose in favor of a much looser, more in Joyce's view, a more accurate presentation of the inner workings of the human mind. As I already mentioned, it was quickly recognized as being a new classic, although it also gained incredible scrutiny because of its content. The Rosenbach owns the only complete manuscript of Ulysses in James Joyce's own hand, which was acquired by Dr. Rosenbach and is, needless to say, a key treasure of the Rosenbach collections today. So all of this reveals what I find, personally speaking, to be the most interesting part of James Joyce's work. What I would propose is a sort of psychological tension that ended up feeding Joyce's creativity. Though Joyce in many ways was ambivalent toward Irish cultural nationalism, perceived provincialism, and the Catholic piety of the country, he expressed his artistry by recreating the Dublin of his youth. Joyce was in many ways captivated by, and perhaps even captive to, the Ireland out of which he had sprung. This leads me to our installation currently on display at the Rosenbach, The Global Other, Race and Empire in James Joyce's Ulysses. It is on display through September 5th, so you do have plenty of time to come enjoy it. And I just want to read to you the synopsis of the show to give you a sense of what it deals with. James Joyce's novel Ulysses is considered a classic of British literature and an iconic Irish story. Yet Joyce wrote the book outside the boundaries of British imperial rule, far away from Ireland. His writings advocated for the equality of Irish people and against corrosive imperialism and ethnic nationalism. Using the plight of the Irish as an exemplar, Joyce noted and critiqued racial inequality among other oppressed peoples, which was a common feature of imperialist societies. Leopold Bloom, the main character of Ulysses, is a Jew who himself occupied racialized and oppressed status in the Ireland of the novel. As a Jew and thus a perennial outsider, Bloom asks readers to experience the novel as if they too are one of many global others. I hope you will come to see the installation. Andrew will also share a link to our Gallery Gateway online exhibition portal in which you can actually see all of the content on display in the gallery, as well as enhanced content. It's interesting to be doing this program tonight from the Rosenbach's parlor, which might not seem like the most natural place for a program about an Irish novel, but in fact, all the portraits that you see in back of me by Gilbert Stuart and Thomas Sully actually depict prominent members of early America's Jewish community. And so we're very interested in taking a globalized and globalist approach to James Joyce's work. So now with that context in mind, I want to talk a little bit more about the music of James Joyce. Just as James Joyce's writings, as those of you who have read his work can attest to this, brim with literary and historical allusions. They're just chock full of so many references that Joyce's ingenious mind was able to weave into narrative stories. They also frequently reference music, and Ulysses in particular features many such references to all sorts of song and music. As discussed earlier, Joyce's father was musical, and Joyce himself played piano and guitar and was an accomplished singer, so much so, in fact, that at various points in his life, Joyce was advised to consider pursuing a professional career in music. Musical references in Ulysses include allusions to traditional Celtic tunes and parlor music of the 19th and early 20th centuries. And as you know, those are some of the pieces that I'll be performing for you a bit later on. It's really interesting to note that even though Joyce is this great influencer in modernist literary circles, his musical tastes actually feel rather traditional. And I was reading one scholarly source in preparation for tonight, which suggests that the reason for this is because Joyce had a real love of melody, and 20th century avant-garde modernist music didn't necessarily feature melodies in the traditional sense. So I find that really interesting. However, in the reverse direction, it is very evident that Joyce's innovations in prose style influenced 20th century composers to rethink how they presented melody and phrasing in their musical composition. So Joyce did have a deep impact on the musical world as well, just as he did on the literary world. So it seems like an appropriate moment to mention and talk briefly about why I'm doing this performance tonight on the Celtic Harp, other than the fact it's the one instrument that I play and have access to. It's actually a very appropriate instrument for this program tonight. Reason being, the harp has a deep association with Celtic culture. A lyre was found on the Isle of Skye that dates to 300 BCE. And from medieval times onward, the harp has had a close association with the cultures of Scotland, Ireland, Cornwall, Wales, Brittany, and France. Many medieval images of harps survive, and 3 actual medieval Celtic harps survive in Ireland and Scotland. You see one, the Brian Boru harp, or Trinity College harp, on the screen to the left, in front of that blue background, which is really the origin of the national symbol of Ireland that you saw on the logo of the consulate's office. Ireland is the one country in the world that has as its national symbol a musical instrument. Early Celtic harps were wire strung as compared to gut or today nylon strung. So the sound quality is somewhat different, unsurprisingly, as the centuries wear on. But Celtic harps really enjoyed a revival. Beginning in the 19th century, stretching all the way to today, you can see the folk harp movement of our own time having a direct lineage out of the Renaissance of Celtic culture in the 19th century. And interestingly enough, some of Joyce's poems were published in a book called The Wild Harp. And I'm pretty sure the Rosenbach doesn't have a copy of this book, and I'll have to check with our librarian about that. But I would love if we could get one for obvious reasons, because it's a nice connection to this musical culture with which Joyce himself was very familiar. So let's talk a little bit more about post-colonial interpretations of James Joyce's works. All that I mean when I say post-colonial is thinking about taking a critical lens toward the politics of the 1800s and early 1900s when thinking about Joyce's literary production. Our installation, The Global Other, puts forward the idea that a careful consideration of Ulysses reveals Joyce's globalist political mindset in an age dominated by imperialism. To say it a little bit more bluntly, Joyce didn't drink the Kool-Aid of British imperial rule. He also didn't drink the Kool-Aid of the Irish cultural revival, Irish patriotism. He was a globalist in his outlook, which perhaps explains why he spent so much of his life abroad. Similarly, I want to argue that a consideration of the musical pieces that Joyce references in his works reveals political and social undercurrents in Irish music in this time period. Language and music figured very prominently in the Gaelic cultural revival of the 1800s and early 1900s, meaning that Joyce's ample references to music grant us a window into that cultural world of a colonized nation with a rich and proud heritage that was beginning to reassert itself again. Now, before I go further, I want to make a key point here for you all. I'm not sufficiently expert. I'm not a sufficient scholar of this content to be able to make a claim that Joyce was knowingly and strategically referencing pieces of music in his works that had a sort of political or cultural underpinning. It would take much more work for me, sort of scholarly work, to be able to make that claim. All that I'm saying is that if we look at the music, especially the lyrics that Joyce puts forward and references in his book, we start to get a sense of the fact that the musical culture of this time period was very much wrapped up in this broader political, social, and cultural ferment in Ireland in the 1800s and early 1900s. So, what do I mean by all of that? Well, I'm just quickly going to share sort of a bird's eye perspective on this, and then we're going to look at some lyrics of actual songs Joyce references in his works. There are three major themes that you can read into, figuratively and literally, the lyrics of some of the songs that Joyce references that reflect on this idea of Ireland as at that time, a nation under an imperial rule, and a resistance to that state. And those themes are historical remembrance, exile, and songs of battle and resistance. Historical remembrance means that many of the Irish folk tunes and sort of sentimental parlor tunes of the era reflect back on an earlier period in Irish history, with Ireland having such an ancient history, reflecting back on a vanished history to offer some sort of lesson to the present day. Many songs also deal with immigration and exile, be it a voluntary exile or a forced exile from a homeland. And finally, songs that more explicitly deal with battles and ideas of resistance. So let's look at a few examples of lyrics that shed light on these topics. One piece that I want to talk about is Erin, meaning Ireland, the tear and the smile in thine eyes. Joyce himself was invited to sing this song in the ancient concert rooms in Dublin on August 26, 1904, in a musical program that was billed as genuinely Irish in an effort to attract members of the Gaelic League who were sort of cultural nationalists. Joyce did not participate in the program for reasons we don't exactly know, possibly because he didn't like the song, or because the Gaelic League had policies and sort of platforms that were contrary to his own plans. The Gaelic League discouraged emigration from Ireland, and very shortly after this time, Joyce himself left Ireland and did not return as a full-time resident. He did, however, reference this song in both Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. And here are a few lyrics just to give you a taste of the piece. Erin, thy silent tear never shall cease. Erin, thy languid smile ne'er shall increase, till, like the rainbow's light, thy various tints unite, and form in heaven's sight one arch of peace. So needless to say, a very sentimental and somber resonance that reflects on this sort of historical remembrance and sentimentality. Many of the songs of this period that were particularly popular, and a couple that I'm going to play for you, were written by a man named Thomas Moore, a very prominent Irish Catholic patriot and cultural figure who wrote a piece called Let Erin Remember. And it tells of the attempted conquest of Ireland by invading Scandinavians, and has a deeper message imbued in it. And I'll read the lyrics to you and we'll talk about that. Let Erin remember the days of old, ere her faithless sons betrayed her, when Malachi wore the collar of gold, which he won from her proud invader. When her kings with standard of green unfurled, led the red branch knights to danger, ere the emerald gem of the western world was set in the crown of a stranger. Now here he's talking about the Irish resisting the attempted takeover by a foreign power in ancient times. But it's not hard to read a more modern political sort of cultural resonance into that idea of the gem of the Western world being set in the crown of a stranger, when in fact at this moment in Irish history, Ireland was a colonized nation. Some songs offer a much more very explicit political message, including one called God Save Ireland, which has a bit of a history behind it. In 1867, leaders of the Irish national movement were jailed in Manchester, England. Efforts to free the men resulted in more arrests, more trials, and the sentencing of 4 individuals to execution. In court, the defendants declared, each of them, God Save Ireland. And this declaration in an English court inspired a popular song about the incident that Joyce references in Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake, and elsewhere. And the lyrics these are lyrics you don't even need to read between the lines. It just is a very blatantly political message. High upon the gallows tree swung the noble-hearted 3, by the vengeful tyrant stricken in their bloom, and they went with souls undaunted to their doom. God save Ireland, said the heroes, God save Ireland, said they all, whether on the scaffold high or the battlefield we die, oh, what matter when for Erin dear we fall. Another song referenced by Joyce in Finnegan's Wake is the Exile of Erin, which I think has a particular resonance given that Joyce was himself sort of a chosen exile from his homeland. O Erin, my country, though sad and forsaken, in dreams I revisit thy sea-beaten shore, but alas, in a far foreign land I awaken, and sigh for the friends who can meet me no more. Similarly, Joyce references, unsurprisingly at various times, the works of Robert Burns, another great Scottish, poet and songwriter, who himself was an advocate for Scottish political freedom from the English. And one Burns song that is intentionally very political is Scots Wha Hae, or Bannockburn, and Joyce actually references this song, which begins with the famous lyrics, Scots Wha Hae. He changes the lyrics in a letter to the poet Ezra Pound, who was a great promoter of Joyce's works, to quote unquote Yanks Wha Hae, meaning Yankees or Americans. Reason being, a man named Wallace in America attempted to revitalize a periodical known as the Little Review, which had been censored and shut down after it started publishing Joyce's Ulysses because of the novel's obscene content. Just as William Wallace fought the English on behalf of the Scottish, a man named Wallace in America was trying to fight for Joyce by reviving the Little Review. And so Joyce wrote new lyrics for the tune Scots Wha Hae in a letter to Ezra Pound, so clearly expressing familiarity with Burns's works as well. So that brings us to the pieces I'm actually going to perform for you tonight. I am not going to play the pieces that I've referenced as part of that social and cultural history, just because I've selected a different repertoire for the evening. So what I want to do now is walk you through all of the pieces that I'm going to play, and then we will turn to the actual recital portion of the evening. Those of you who attended my Robert Burns parlor concert some months ago may remember that for that event, I introduced the pieces and then played them and interpreted them. We're not going to do it in that way this time because of the technology. It's just easier for me to play all the material straight through after I adjust my microphone appropriately. So what I'm going to do is tell you about the pieces all up front, and then my colleague Andrew will enter the names of the songs into the chat box so that you can keep up with where we are in the program. So I've selected 7 pieces to perform this evening, each of which has a Joyce connection. The pieces are Down by the Sally Gardens, The Last of Ogram, Ye Banks and Braes of Bonnie Doon, Love's Old Sweet Song, The Harp That Once Through Terrace Halls, The Last Rose of Summer, and I Dreamt That I Dwelt in Marble Halls. I will now walk you through each of these pieces in terms of its history and connection to Joyce before turning to actually performing them for you. So, Down by the Sally Gardens is probably one of the more well-known pieces that I'm playing for you tonight, well-known by a broad audience. It's a traditional melody. Tradition says that the lyrics were written by William Butler Yeats. Joyce himself performed this song at the Ancient Concert Rooms in Dublin on the evening of Saturday, August 27th, 1904, which he incorrectly remembered as his first public musical performance. The Ancient Concert Rooms, as many of you know, are mentioned in The Dead, as well as in other works by James Joyce, and play a really important role in Irish history and culture, as well as the works of Joyce. Just to give you a taste of the lyrics, I am not singing for you this evening, and you should be thankful for that. I like to think of myself as a tolerable harpist. I am not a tolerable singer. So I thought I would just share the lyrics with you on the screen and then read them to you before I actually play the pieces. So here's just a taste of the lyrics of Down by the Sally Garden. It was down by the Sally Gardens my love and I did meet. She crossed the Sally Gardens with little snow-white feet. She bid me take life easy as the leaves grow on the tree, but I was young and foolish, and with her I did not agree. The second piece I'll be playing for you is The Last of Ogram. This is a very well-known song. We've already talked about it a little bit tonight. It appears in The Dead. And without giving you an overview of the whole plot of The Dead, what you need to know is that this song makes the main character, Greta, think of her dead lover, Michael Fury, when she hears the song. And in The Dead, the song represents the old Irish folk traditions as compared to sophisticated continental European life. It is forever associated with Dubliners and with the Dead in particular. And it has a very special meaning in James Joyce's life as well, because Joyce learned this song from Nora Barnacle, who eventually became his wife. In 1909, Joyce sat at the kitchen table at Nora's house in Galway while Nora's mother sang this song. And for Joyce, this song represents the freedom to love openly and passionately. And I want to show you just a few objects from the Rosenbach collection where we can see this song referenced. So here you see a first edition of Dubliners from the Rosenbach collection. And if you look about a little more than halfway down, you'll see the main character, Greta, say, what is the name of that song you were singing at the Ancient Concert Rooms, is where they were at this point in the story. And the singer says it's called The Last of Ogram. Why? Do you know it? The Last of Ogram, she repeated. I couldn't think of the name. And the story goes on, and you can see on page 261, it even quotes some of the lyrics in the center of the page there. And eventually what happens as the story reaches its climax, Greta reveals to her her current husband, Gabriel, that this song made her think of, quote unquote, a young boy I used to know named Michael Fury. He used to sing that song, The Last of Ogram. He was very delicate, which sort of raises a lot of anger in Gabriel's mind. Indeed, this song had evoked memories of a former lover, who even though he was dead, hence the name of the story. The song itself is about a young woman who had a child with a man to whom she was not married, a wealthy, aristocratic man, and she is sort of turned away at the door of his estate by this wealthy man's mother, who refuses to recognize the existence of this child and this woman. So here's just a taste of the lyrics. If you'll be the Last of Ogram, as I'm taking you mean to be, tell me the first token that passed between you and me, those words being spoken by the mother impersonating her son. And then the young woman says, the rain falls on my yellow locks and the dew it wets my skin. My babe lies cold within my arms. Lord Gregory, let me in. The next song I'll perform is a Burns piece, He Banks and Braes of Bonnie Doon. Joyce sang this very well-known song after Christmas dinner in 1939. Similarly, isn't a happy story. It tells a story of a young woman abandoned by her lover. And for anyone interested in learning more about the Rosenbach's Burns collection, I do recommend that you check out the recording of Highland Heart, which is another program I've done available on the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. Here are the lyrics of Banks and Braes. You banks and braes of Bonnie Doon, how can you bloom so fresh and fair? How can you chant, you little birds, and I so weary, full of care? You'll break my heart, you warbling birds that wanton through the flowery thorn. You mind me a departed joys, departed never to return. A little more upbeat song, and probably the song most closely associated with Joyce, I like to think of it as the Rosenbach's theme song, is Love's Old Sweet Song, an iconic work forever associated with Ulysses. The song is first mentioned in the Calypso episode of Ulysses, but it's most important toward the end of the book in the Ithaca and Penelope episodes. At the end of the novel, the text of Ulysses offers instructions for singing the work almost exactly as they were printed in the sheet music. And Joyce himself sang Love's Old Sweet Song at the Trianon restaurant in Paris in the early 1920s. And Ulysses is filled with references to the book, so here, or to the song. So here you see in a first edition, Nosy Flynn says, give us a tune, Bloom, one of the old sweet songs, clearly a reference to this particular work. And the manuscript that we hold at the Rosenbach. I had a lot of fun trying to find exactly where the references to the work appear in the manuscript. So here in Circe, you see a reference to the dear, dear days beyond recall, love's old sweet song. And here's a little taste of the lyrics of the piece. Just a song at twilight when the lights are low and the flickering shadows softly come and go. Though the heart be weary, sad the day and long, still to us at twilight comes love's old song, comes love's old sweet song. Another piece that I'm sharing with you is titled The Harp That Once Through Terrace Halls. And this definitely fits within this sort of having a broader social resonance, as we talked about earlier in the program. Tara was the ancient seat of the High Kings of Ireland, and thus has long occupied a really important place in Irish myth and legend. The ancient kings always kept a troupe of musicians in their court, and harpers were the most prominent. When foreign powers sought to subdue the Irish, this also meant silencing the harpers. So the harp ended up having a sort of deeper political meaning because it was so closely associated with a distant past in Irish history. The lyrics of this song tell of silent harps that no longer play, which it sort of symbolizes this, longer history of the Irish. So here's a taste of the lyrics of this song, this is by Thomas Moore, who we discussed earlier. The harp that once through Tara's halls the soul of music shed, now hangs as mute on Tara's walls as if the soul were fled. So sleeps the pride of former days, so glory's thrill is over. And hearts that once beat high for praise now feel that pulse no more. No more to lords and ladies bright the harp of Terrace swells, the chord alone that breaks at night its tale of ruin tells. Thus freedom now so seldom wakes, the only throb she gives is when some heart indignant breaks to show that still she lives. I will also play for you another Thomas More piece called The Last Rose of Summer, referenced in the Sirens episode of Ulysses. It's one of the characters' favorite songs in that episode, and it is also one of my favorite songs. It's one of my two favorite songs that I'm playing for you this evening, the other being the final selection on the program for tonight. So here you see a reference to The Last Rose of Summer in the manuscript. In the Sirens episode, Joyce says, "Last rose of Castile of summer left bloom. I feel so lone, alone." It's sort of a stream of consciousness garbling of two different songs, one being the Rose of Castile, the other being the Last Rose of Summer. Here you see the song title specifically referenced and underlined, "The Last Rose of Summer." And here you see lyrics to this piece of music. "'Tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone. All her lovely companions are faded and gone. No flower of her kindred, no rosebud is nigh, to reflect back her blushes and give sigh for sigh." So another one of these very sentimental parlor pieces. That brings us to the final song on the program for tonight, which is "I Dreamt That I Dwelt." In marble halls, this is one of the most famous parlor songs of the 1800s. It is my favorite song of all time, so I, of course, had to include it. It was written by a Dublin-born composer, Michael William Balfe, as part of an opera known as the Bohemian Girl. This aria is his most remembered work, without question, in no small part because it has been recorded in relatively recent years by Enya and Celtic Woman. I think Joan Sutherland famously sang this piece. So it has a broader pop culture resonance beyond its operatic origins. Joyce himself had a close connection to Michael William Balfe. He claimed that his mother and her sisters had, when young, studied singing under Balfe. And Balfe appears, and the song appears in various places in Joyce's works. Popular lore held that singing the second verse of this aria is bad luck, which actually plays into a reference that Joyce makes to this work in his work. It has this piece actually has a Rosenbach connection because Balfe based his opera, the Bohemian Girl, on a story by Cervantes, and the Rosenbach owns a first edition of this story, which appears in a book in our collection, which you see on the screen, which is a pretty wonderful connection to have. So you can see references to Michael William Balfe in Ulysses. You see his name in the Lestrygonians episode on the page there. And the song appears in Dubliners as well. So in the Clay story, you see that the main character actually sings the song at the very end of the story. And there you see the lyrics of the first verse printed in italics at the bottom of the first page that you see, and then at the top of the second page as well. The song is also referenced in Finnegan's Wake, and it's a very romantic piece of music. Basically, the plot of the novel or the plot of the opera is that there's this young noble girl who is kidnapped at a young age and falls in love with a young man, and she has a dream that she is an aristocrat, but that he loves her, quote unquote, just the same. At that point, she didn't realize that in fact she was. She did at one point in her life dwell in marble halls. So I'll just read to you the lyrics of the first verse. "I dreamt that I dwelt in marble halls, with vassals and serfs at my side, and of all who assembled within those walls, that I was the hope and the pride. I had riches all too great to count, and a high ancestral name. But I also dreamt, which pleased me most, that you loved me still the same. You loved me still the same, that you loved me still the same." So those are the pieces I'm going to perform for you shortly. I'm not going to be returning to the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to close out of it so that you get a better view of the parlor momentarily. But I want to tell you before I do that about a few other resources that Andrew will share with you to keep learning. We have various digital collections guides that can teach you more about our collection here at the Rosenbach, as well as some blog posts that tell you more about the connection between Joyce and music. And I will invite you on behalf of the collections department, if you wish to make a collections inquiry and learn more about our holdings, you are very, very welcome to do so at any time. Andrew will also share with you a list of secondary sources that we used in the creation of our installation and in the creation of this program, so that you can follow up on any of the themes we talked about. And as I mentioned, following the program this evening, In the next few days, you will be getting an email from me with links to PDFs of much of the music that I am performing tonight. Not the same arrangements, I will note. I'm sending the sheet music as piano music, and what I'm playing for you are my own arrangements for harp. But this will give you the melody lines if you're interested in learning more. Finally, please mark your calendars for Thursday, December 16th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. The next Rosenbach parlor concert will be the Ballad of the Harp Weaver, a dramatic recitation of Edna St. Vincent Millay's classic poem paired with Christmas music, Christmas carols on harp, performed live from Marianne Moore's living room at the Rosenbach. So please do mark your calendars for what will be a very enjoyable follow-up to tonight's program. If you have any questions, for time's sake, we're not having a discussion session as part of this program, but I want you to have my email address, alames@rosenbach.org. Feel free to send me an email, questions, comments, concerns, whatever you want to talk about. We can follow up following the program. I want to thank all of my colleagues at the Rosenbach, especially Andrew White for his technical support, Registrar Joby Zink and Facilities Manager Christina Doe for their logistical support in this program, Christina Robold for digitizing pages of the Ulysses manuscript, and a special thank you to Linda Wood of the music department at the Free Library, and Meg Newberger of Collection Care for digitizing sheet music for me to be able to send to you. I mean, that's just really exciting, I think, to be able to share that with you from our collections. I also want to thank our colleagues in the MAPS collection at the Free Library for providing some resources as well. With that, from our parlor to yours, thank you so much for participating in tonight's program. If you all bear with me for just one moment, I'm going to adjust my microphone, move over to the harp, and we will begin the music. As I mentioned, I have somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes of music for you prepared. that concludes the program for this evening. I want to thank all of you so very much for the opportunity to play my harp for you tonight. It's such a pleasure for me to be able to bring my interests in music, history, and literature together in this way. I do hope that you enjoyed yourself as much as I did. And please be on the lookout for an email from me with more resources and materials soon, and trust that there are many more opportunities for virtual and on-site programs here at the Rosenbach in the very near future. So with that, I'm going to conclude our program tonight. I wish you all a happy Bloomsday season. Thank you, and we'll be in touch. Good night.